Let's talk about anxiety and the common myth that anxiety somehow protects us, that anxiety tells us about danger, and that it might even be useful at times. All of this is complete nonsense. Actually, anxiety serves one protective function and only one, and it's not what you think it is. I'll get back to this a little bit later. I'm Jurgen Rasmussen, by the way, and welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis channel. So I see people who struggle with anxiety every day in my office, and almost all of them tend to believe that anxiety somehow either protects them or is meant to protect them, or that it has something to do with danger, that the feelings of anxiety somehow tells them something about risk or what they should do or what they shouldn't do, and that they should take this feeling very seriously. But the truth is, anxiety has no use and it has no protective value whatsoever. Now, some concrete fears might have some protective value. So, the distinction here being, let's say that you see a wild animal and you have a fear response, right? That might have some protective function in that it really gets you alert and focused and ready to shut everything else out and to completely deal with the situation. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I was down watching TV at midnight, and suddenly I heard the front door open. I heard some sounds, and I immediately kind of perked up and felt a little bit of adrenaline, got very sharp, very focused, and I moved towards the door and I realized that I just hadn't locked it properly, right? So when something happens and you have a response that kind of alerts you and sharpens your focus so that you investigate and get present, that might have a fear response. But the hallmark of anxiety is that nothing's really going on. We're just thinking. We're just lost in thought. We just have these what if type thoughts about some imaginary future. This does not protect you at all. What really does protect you in life is just good information and common sense and the ability to quickly pick up what's actually going on in your environment and to respond to it. Anxiety takes your attention away from that. So, for example, in cold Norwegian winters where I live, you know, I let's say I come home from work one day from seeing clients and my wife is making some food on the stove. You know, I never take my cold fingers and warm them, on the stove because I know I would get third degree burns. But there's no anxiety. I don't need any anxiety to protect me. It's not the case that the closer I get to the stove, the more anxiety I feel. And hadn't it been for the anxiety, I would have put my cold hands on the hot stove. The reason why I do it is because I have common sense. I know not to do that. Or when my kids were younger and I had to hold them when we were in the city center, let's say that we were standing at a junction and we're waiting for the green light, I know that if I were to take my kids and walk out into the street, we'd be run over and probably severely injured or killed. But I had no anxiety. I don't need any anxiety to not walk into the street. I only need common sense. I only need the information to not do that. Sometimes I work with people who say that they're scared of driving. Most of them have not been in an accident, but a few have. And sometimes they might say, but the anxiety protects me. Driving could be dangerous. I could end up in an accident. And I usually say to them, you're right. Driving has some element of danger. You could end up in an accident. And what you better do is to discern for yourself whether the benefits of being able to drive outweigh the risks. And if you land on it not being the case, more power to you. But if you land on, hey, wait a minute, yes, there are some risks, but the benefits of having a car and to be able to drive it surely outweighs the risks, then the question becomes, what state of mind could you be in to be the best driver for yourself and for other people? And the question is, would you be a better driver if your knuckles were white and your heart was beating like crazy and your vision was foggy and you had all these catastrophic thoughts about drunk drivers and accidents? No, because if your mind and body was riddled with that stuff, 90% of your attention then would be on your inner feelings and your own imagination, which would result in you having very little attention left to detect what's actually going on in traffic right now and to adjust to it. What makes you a good driver in traffic is obviously that you know how to drive the car, you know the rules, you have some skills, and you have the ability to quickly detect what's actually happening on the road. So to be the best driver possible, you want to be in a relaxed, outward focused orientation so that you can easily pick up what's actually happening on the road. You know, if you were ever in actual danger, the last thing your brain would do would be anxiety. So I used to interview people who had been in dangerous situations, actual life or death situations. For example, people who lost control over their car on icy Norwegian roads at high speed. And when I asked these people, what did you feel then and there when you were in the middle of it? Most of them said, I didn't really have time to feel anything. I just, the only thing that existed was the road. And time slowed down, and I was just hyper focused and completely present. Something like some description like that was the most typical response. Because the last thing your brain wants to do in a situation like that is to create a bunch of what if scenarios. It's going to go this, the road. And when you're in that state, there's no anxiety. But later, when people sat in the ditch with the ignition off, and I asked them, what did you feel at that time? Now many people said, oh, I was hyperventilating, I was shaking, my thoughts were worrying about, what if that semi-trailer had hit my daughter? But this did not occur during the actual acute danger. So this is important to notice. Something else too, even fear. Back in the day, 50,000 years ago, or maybe 100,000 years ago, when we lived in small tribes where dangers were more, let's say, biologically based than concrete, you could probably make a good argument that our typical fear intuitions were likely well adjusted to the environment and that these fear responses had some protective value. And they probably still do in concrete danger situations. But today, where most of us are just thinking and anticipating and worrying and anxietizing, it's very, very different. So every year, there's these lists produced where they show the 10 most typical causes of death and the 10 things people claim to be the most afraid of. And usually there's hardly any correlation. The last time I checked, the only thing that was on both lists were the fear of germs and viruses and bacteria, and tuberculosis and influenza at the time being the 8th leading cause of death in the world. Outside of that, there was no correlation whatsoever. So anxiety does not protect you. It's not really useful. It has no protective value. It's not a response to life events. The only protective value that anxiety has is this. Imagine a car and a speedometer. The only thing that the speedometer really tells you anything about is how quickly the wheels are turning. So you know that if the speedometer shows 0, the wheels aren't turning at all. If it suddenly shows 150 kilometers per hour, you know that those wheels are turning like crazy. But where the speedometer points tells you nothing about whether to buy that house or go on that date or change your job or even whether to turn left or right to get to your desired destination. In the same way, when you have those moments of stillness, of flow, of being in the zone where there's just the sunset or just the conversation, that's your self-referential thinking barometer being at 0 or maybe 5, right? If you're having a panic attack, that's your thinking barometer being at perhaps 180 kilometers per hour. Meaning how anxious you are tells you something about the amount of thinking you're having, the kind of self-referential, worry-based thinking. And it tells you something about how quickly the thoughts are moving. So it's only a thinking barometer. So the feelings of anxiety then are there to tell you that, hey, dude, you got a lot of thinking and you're beginning to take it a bit too seriously. Would you like to wake up to the fact that you're thinking? That's the protective function. A bit like if you're driving on the highway and you're kind of falling asleep, you might hear the sound of these rumble strips that wake you up and essentially say, dude, wake up, realize that you're driving. You course correct and you're back on the road. Same thing with anxiety as a thinking barometer. It tells you about the state of your thinking in the moment. It's a warning that you're overthinking and taking your thoughts a bit too seriously, and an invitation to wake up. If you can view it like that, then it has some protective function. I hope this was useful for you. If you like these ideas and if you struggle with anxiety or some other issues and you'd like to make some changes and you're curious to see whether you and I could be a good fit, I invite you to email me at provocativehypnosis.com. We always set up a quick initial conversation to have a quick chat before we decide to work together or not. If you're watching this in 2025, I have a seminar coming up soon, which is about how to use insights from meditation in your change work client. How to help people who are not meditators to have the typical insights that people often have when they meditate. And also, a lot of people are meditating these days, and a lot of people are running into trouble, and most people don't know how to help them. So how can you help meditators who are lost and stuck on the meditative path? If this is of interest, check out the seminar page at provocativehypnosis.com. And as always, thanks for listening.